The Career Man. Well, we're here to talk about the holy quadrinity, the 4 factors that overwhelmingly define one's work and career: income, competency, legal status, and passion. Or, in layman's terms, a job can be considered in terms of whether it pays the bills, whether you're good at it, whether it's legit, and whether you enjoy it. Now, I've chosen to represent these 4 factors in somewhat of a convoluted Venn diagram, which demonstrates that in the ideal scenario, the intersection of all 4 of these factors would be the ultimate job and career. This is represented by the acronym CLIP, or CLIP, being a job that you are competent at, that is completely legal, that provides a desirable income, and that you are passionate about. And anything less than a complete intersection of those 4 factors is, by some measures, a compromise, or by some measures, reality. And in the Venn diagram, you can see these represented by areas of 3 overlapping factors. For instance, CLI, CLP, CIP, or LIP. What I've not chosen to indicate here is conceivably working scenarios that only have 2 overlapping factors. For instance, if you are passionate about something and it's legal, but you're not good at it and it doesn't pay the bills, what could this look like? Well, that could be a hobby, playing the guitar. On the other hand, if you are really good at something and it's legal, but it doesn't pay the bills and you hate it with a passion, then that might be something as mundane as administrative tasks, completing forms, submitting your tax return. You can do it, it's legal, but it provides you no income and no pleasure. The third 2-factor scenario to consider here is a situation where you're good at something and it pays the bills, but unfortunately you hate it and it's not legal. Now, without getting demonetized, you might be, conceivably, hypothetically, a begrudging assassin. You're good at it, it definitely pays the bills, but perhaps it clashes with your morals and you dislike it intensely, and quite obviously it's illegal. The fourth 2-factor scenario to consider here would be a job that pays the bills and that you're passionate about, but you're not very good at, and it's not legal. So conceivably that might be a situation where someone's willing to pay for your services and you enjoy providing those services, even though you are terrible at that job, and quite obviously it's not legal. So An example of this might be someone that's inherited a business, for instance, whereby they are default earning a lot of money off the back of goodwill and a legacy of more competent forebearers. They may quite enjoy that job, but they're not very good at it, and it's a questionably legal business. So in reality, those monofactorial or even dual factor scenarios are a little less relatable, a little less realistic, and perhaps not as relevant to most of the lay public. An overlap of 3 factors, such as CLI, a job that you're good at, that pays the bills, and is perfectly legal. But unfortunately, a job that you have little passion or interest in. Now, conceivably, this might be a older member of the workforce, a more experienced member of the workforce, someone that's climbed the corporate ladder or the structure of a business, someone that's been promoted, and therefore they've accrued increases in their salary. They're involved in a perfectly legal industry and occupation, and quite clearly, owing to years of work, they've become very competent, very good at what they do. But I'd rather be doing something else. So that's CLI. On the other hand, we have CIP, where you're in a job that, again, you're very good at, and again, pays the bills, but this time round, it's not legal. And this time round, you do have some passion and interest in the work. So, conceivably, this would fit the mold of criminal type activities, clearly, that generate some form of income, that have people who know what they're doing and who quite realistically enjoy what they do as well, in spite of the fact of their activities being illegal. Another occupation that would fall into this CIP category would be, for want of a better term, those involved in feel-good occupations and industries. And by feel good, I mean they make others feel good. And again, depending on which part of the world you're in, these feel good services may have questionable or very clearly non-legal status, but are very lucrative, have passion in more ways than one, and evidently involve competency, lest you want to earn nothing. The next trifecta to consider would be LIP or LIP. This is a working scenario where you are lucky enough to have a very desirable income, you love your job, and it's legal. However, you're not very good at it. So, these people may be in a managerial type position where, because of their position in the structure of an organization or company, they do command quite a generous income, but they are not very competent at what they do. Instead, they are lucky enough to oversee people lower down the hierarchy who are competent. So the managerial types. The other group of people falling into the LIP category would be those who've had an amazing streak of luck. Perhaps they have invested in the stock market at the right time with little research and a lot of luck, and have come out quite wealthy. They enjoy what they do. It's very much legal, but is not necessarily a repeatable or recommended career path or course of action. So, in other words, it took a gamble and it paid off. Perhaps they invested in a business. Perhaps they stumbled across an idea that turned viral and became rich and wealthy by sheer luck overnight. The last triple factor category would be CLP, in that it could represent a working scenario whereby you are very good at what you do, you're very passionate about what you do, you're involved in a perfectly legitimate field. However, it doesn't pay very well, if at all. Now, several things could fall into this scenario, from volunteers who give up their time and don't expect any pay and are very passionate about what they do, very good at what they do, and obviously have no question over the legality. It could also represent hobbies which take up your time, but have not been monetized and are not your main occupation, or not even classified as an occupation at present. CLP could also represent startups or fledgling business ventures whereby an idea, a skill, a product has been conceived off the back of genuine passion and interest. It's been conceived around knowledge and technical expertise or pure competency. It is a perfectly legal business. However, it's too early in the life of the business to be generating income, or perhaps it should be generating income, but it isn't. So the 3-factor scenarios: CLI, CIP, LIP, and CLP. Now, obviously, the aim here would be to think about moving from a trinity to a quadrinity, a 3-factor situation to a 4-factor overlap. And if we look at the 3-factor scenarios in turn, we could consider how that shift might be brought about. So, for instance, in the CLI category, so you're competent at your job, it's legal, it pays well, you just don't have that passion. Two things could help you to find that passion, and we will explore this in detail later on in this presentation. First is to gain some sort of perspective, to redefine what passion in that line of work is, and therefore move the goalposts and recategorize the CLI as a CLIP. And the other method of moving out of the CLI area would be to make some sort of a career change or maneuver in order to, again, encompass not just competency, legality and income, but some measure of passion. Now, for argument's sake, if we were in the CIP category, a job that is illegal but pays well, you love and you're good at, what could you do? Well, you could do what various criminal organizations around the world have done since time immemorial. You could launder the income and profits you have and turn over a new leaf. Or you could consider converting your current business structure into some sort of legal entity. And without going into too much detail, clearly some criminal organizations have managed to do that in terms of transitioning from the street to the boardroom, from casual clothes to suits. If we turn our attention to the LIP category, so a job that you love doing, pays well, perfectly legitimate, but that unfortunately, either by your own admission or by others' assessment, you're not very competent at, well, how can those people find competency? On the one hand, they could continue to play the game of poker in the sense of subcontracting the competency to those that they are managing. In other words, they are holding all the cards and continuing to play the game, and maintaining a facade of competency by way of others who are much more competent than them being under their control. Or these LIP types could gain the competency by learning, by osmosis, which is to say, if you are in that sort of managerial position, looking after people who are smarter than you, who have way more experience than you, then availing yourself to them, learning from them, could conceivably increase your own knowledge and expertise. Perhaps not to the same level, but by some measure. In terms of the CLP category, so a job that you're great at, that you love, that's legal, but just doesn't pay the bills. Well, on the one hand, those jobs may well be hobbies that should just continue to be hobbies. That is perfectly acceptable. On the other hand, in order to move into the four-factor overlap, it might be that that person needs to consider the feasibility of converting that hobby or that idea into a business. Whether that's looking into the potential size of the target market, whether that's advertising, whether that's literally scaling up, whether that's investing, whether that's committing to a business plan. Those people in the CLP category have an opportunity to generate income. So, realistically, with these three-factor scenarios, where do they stand? Well, if you're like the majority of people, then the idea of being involved in illegal activity in the first place probably is a non-starter. So the CRP types we shall not explore much further in this presentation. If you're looking at the LIP types and thinking that is a bit of a gamble, well, you're not wrong. Those folks are very good at what they do, and their lack of competency is only sustained by the fact that they are managing others who are much more competent than them. So it's a tenuous balance that they maintain, but one that clearly pays off well, and so may well suit certain personality types or career aspirations, but not necessarily everyone. The CLP types deserve some consideration. On the one hand, it may be very obvious that a hobby should remain a hobby, but potentially for some people, giving that serious consideration may be enough for a hobby to turn into a profitable business or idea, and so that category, CLP, should not be entirely discounted. Potentially the greatest number of people have an interest in the CLI category. They're in jobs, professions, fields, stages in their career where they have got an income, they have a perfectly legal job, and they have the skills and expertise and experience to be deemed competent. But they are considering the meaning and passion in their job. And so the CLI category is what we will turn our attention to next. CLI, competent, legal, and income. Now, I think it's worth bearing in mind that achieving the holy quadrinity in this situation may be through gaining perspective or finding passion. And I've tried to indicate this by using ostensibly the same acronym, CLIP, but on the one hand using a lowercase p, and on the other hand using an uppercase p. Now, we mentioned on the previous slides that those wishing to move out of the three-factor scenario, CLI, to a rarefied, idealized situation may try to maneuver themselves to find passion. And so this is idealized change. This is a situation whereby you might do well to think of what skills you have that are transferable to another organization, another company, another field perhaps. This is a situation where you take stock and identify what your true passions are, because you may not have ever considered that up until that point in time. Perhaps your passions have changed over time, and so identifying passions is part of the process of achieving CLIP. You may also be thinking, what are the gaps that you have in your skills, in your training, in your experience, that are preventing you from achieving passion. Being in this category may also involve undertaking some homework, some reconnaissance, some due diligence, in the sense of talking to people who are in other jobs or in other organizations, in other fields, and finding out what those jobs are really like. Because what you perceive as potentially being the ideal job may well be a situation where the grass is greener. And so having that information to confirm your suspicions, or to reaffirm your intentions, is really important. People that are looking to move from CLI to CLI capital P with a passion may conceivably straddle two jobs or two careers, in that instead of a wholesale transition from one job to another, they may still maintain some sort of part-time or managerial capacity, and then have another part-time job, or indeed a full-time job, which they are truly passionate about. And that brings us to another point about people who are trying to achieve the holy quadrinity, and that is the idea of juggling different occupations or schedules, as opposed to fully committing, quitting one job, one profession, one field, and making that leap of faith into a new business, job, field. The final thing to consider for these CLI plus passion folks would be the idea of a safety net, in that if we followed our passions on a whim, what safety nets or fail-safes do you have in place in case those passions are indeed mirages? On the other hand, a full 4-factor clip scenario, clip with the lowercase p that is, may involve redefining your perspective. This is unlike the aforementioned version of clip, in that it is a realistic scenario where you may continue with your profession but find meaning that perhaps was always there but you had not noticed. It may be that you continue with your job and that you find your passions and your hobbies, and so you achieve job satisfaction by way of having a balance between your passions outside of work. It might be that you achieve clip by working less and therefore having more time for, again, other passions and interests, and perhaps health-giving activities that contribute to your sense of contentment, connectedness, physical, mental, social health. It might be that taking stock and gaining perspective in your work involves cutting back on the hours that you work, or indeed the sociable hours that you work. So, for instance, if you are a shift worker, then transitioning to a more daylight hours roster while still staying in the same profession. Achieving a lowercase clip may also be brought about by taking a sabbatical. And the benefit of a sabbatical is that instead of being on the inside trying to look out, well, you are outside your profession, your usual job, and you are looking in. So that can provide perspective. The important thing to note is that people who are in a state of lowercase clip may well have a very well-defined exit plan, whereby in the short term they are happy to have a very generous income in a totally legal job that they're good at, even though they may not have oodles of passion, because they have an exit plan. They may do this for 5 or 10 years while they can, and then they may trade off some income and transition to a job where they have more interest and passion. So, moving from CLI to a 4-factor overlap is really about walking down one of two paths. The lowercase clip, which we've mentioned is about perspective, and the uppercase clip, which we've mentioned is about finding passions. We are now going to turn our attention to that uppercase clip, whereby in an ideal situation, you have found your passion in a job that is legal, that pays well, and that you are highly competent at. Well, there are still some reality checks to consider here. Firstly, your age and your ambition. If you are young by definition, you have many working years ahead of you, and so therefore you have much time to seek out passions, to come to new understandings, to fail, to meander, to procrastinate. Whereas if you're older, then some of those ambitions may not be physically possible anymore. May be unrealistic. So, for instance, deciding to become an Olympic marathoner when you're 55 years old and about to be retrenched may be a little bit ambitious. The second part of the CLIP reality check is understanding the difference between skills and enthusiasm. On the one hand, you could see yourself in an ideal job, but no amount of enthusiasm may be able to engineer that scenario because you don't have the prerequisite qualifications, skills, or experience. And so, understanding that the dream job may not be your first job is the point here. It may take you years and many jobs to arrive at that position, if at all. And so, at best case, we're talking about delayed gratification here. At worst case, you're just dreaming, and that dream job is not feasible. The third point to consider here is considering retraining when you're an adult, especially a more mature adult. So you've done your homework, for instance, and you think that retraining will allow you to work in a job that you have more passion and interest in. And whilst this may be true, are you willing to sacrifice the time to retrain, which may be a year or two or more of an apprenticeship, of going back to university, of an internship in a business, or literally working your way up the hierarchy of a company? When you retrain, are you willing to potentially sacrifice some income whilst you train, or whilst you work your way into the position that you would like? And for those whose retraining involves university education or higher education, college education, as an adult, are you ready to return, if at all, to the idea of study, to the idea of assignments and deadlines. These factors in retraining can be a non-starter in the first instance. On the note of higher education, understand that if you take a different career path, that there are many courses at universities which are hyper-specialized, and sometimes that is a necessity, but other times that may lead you down a path which you better hope pays off. Otherwise, you'll need to backtrack and get back on a more broader path to find your real passion. The other thing to note about higher education is that there is a lot of savvy marketing from universities, and certainly a lot of courses and subjects on offer, but consider the possibility that the job or position that you want to be in may not actually discriminate between whether you have a diploma or a degree, or indeed have any form of higher education, and so the exercise may be redundant. The third thing to consider with higher education is whether or not your intelligence and mindset is suitable for that environment. Sometimes what constitutes a good student isn't necessarily compatible with what constitutes a good worker, and putting yourself through higher education may be a difficult path to see through. Another CLIP reality check is financial compromise. So, in finding your passion, in working a job that is totally legal, that you're good at, and that you're passionate about, how much of a drop in income are you willing to trade off to find that job? It may be that the income is equivalent. It may be that the income is actually better than your old job. But how much of that income are you willing to trade off in order to find passion? And the point here is that if the lifestyle you currently maintain cannot be serviced by the income in your ideal job, then that job may not be for you, or your lifestyle may need to be curtailed. Dependents are a legitimate consideration. So, in pursuing your dream job, how much of a factor do your kids or do your financial commitments weigh into this? It may be that pursuing that dream job is not as high priority as putting your kids first. It may be that you need to take care of these financial commitments or debts before you are safely or practically able to make some more selfish decisions. The other part of the CLIP reality check to consider here is whether change can be staggered. On the one hand, you may have no choice but to take your time to move from your current position to a job that is ideal. It may be that you can't realistically give up your existing job entirely, and so therefore you maintain some sort of part-time capacity. It may be that change starts with a side hustle whereby you maintain your current job and you maintain a relatively conservative risk profile, but patiently, slowly explore whether this side hustle may have more substance. Automation and artificial intelligence are inevitably part of the CLIP reality check. It may be possible for you to forecast whether or not increasing automation and AI will make your planned dream job redundant, or indeed make your current job redundant. And so this may alter your plans, or indeed fast track your plans. Longevity, that is another reality check list item, in that even if you manage to retrain or relocate or chance upon the ideal job, you've made sacrifices, you've put others first. Realistically, depending on your age, how much time have you got to work in that dream job? Because if you are within several years of retiring, then it may be not worth the hassle, at least not in a wholesale capacity or a full-time capacity. Even if you aren't staring down the barrel of retirement, can you see yourself in that dream job for 5, 10, 20 years? Or is this dream job just a passing fad? In which case, that job may not be worth pursuing in the first instance. Sometimes the grass is greener on the other side, so to speak, and before you put yourself through the effort of making that change, can you actually see yourself in that role in the longer term? The final element of the CLIP reality check is the idea of failure. It's important to prepare for the worst outcome rather than expect that failure is not a possibility. The likelihood of failure may vary, but it will always be a possibility. And so, on the one hand, if you are moving away from a very established position or a company, consider not burning all your bridges, lest you need to retreat and return to your job or to your company or to your organization. The possibility of failure also means that you may need to prepare yourself financially. The possibility of failure may mean preparing to reverse any relocations. It may be uprooting children from schools. It may be that failure has implications for your spouse or your partner. So however confident you may be, and no matter what you have gone through in order to land that dream job, consider that making such a significant move is not without some risk. And so ultimately, if we come back to the idea of a holy quadrinity, a job that ticks the competency, legality, income, and passion prerequisites, a job that you're good at, that you enjoy, that pays the bills and is totally legit, then we really ought to stand back and look at the big picture. Specifically, this idea that the P in CLIP may be a true passion, but it may also be that some perspective is what allows you to be grateful and happy and maintain your current job. It may be that at different stages in your life, it is highly likely that you will not have all factors, you will not have all four factors in your favor. And having the commitment to stay the course, to have balance in your life, to have passions outside of work, to have that sort of perspective is just as admirable as someone who idealizes their change and is willing to chase that dream job and make sacrifices along the way. And perhaps the best example I can give to illustrate this point is the difference between older generations of workers, say baby boomers, for instance, those born after World War II, as compared to millennials or Generation Y. In that, this older generation didn't need to chase dreams or idealize a perfect job, because they were just happy to have a job in the first place. They were happy to be providing for their family. So we have to be careful in the fact that the Holy Quadrinity, CLIP, is entirely a social construct, and therefore it has as much meaning and relevance as we individually ascribe to it. What's a desirable income for you may be excessive for me. What you define as being passionate may just be a passing interest or a part of the job for me. What you think is highly specialized and competent may be generic and easily achievable for me. And so we just need to understand that the holy quadrinity is a concept, and that it's up to you to decide what sort of a career you want to make.